There we go. Okay. Part 6. Upcoming spring prayer. Thus began Angelica's first study group, run by my guard knights. She would need to return to the Royal Academy for classes once the feast celebrating spring was over. So she had been engaging in fervent games of karate in the night dorms with the other apprentices while she still had the chance. Cornelius taught her how to move her hands to grab the cards she recognized as quickly as possible. As for studying the fundamentals of warfare, we focused on a book that Lamprecht had brought me back when I passed out after my baptism ceremony. I hadn't really understood it at the time since it focused on the use of mana, but with Daniel moving the Gwenning pieces as he explained the passages, I started to feel like I was really grasping it. Gwennin, incidentally, was a chess-like game where moving the pieces took mana. Okay, Daniel, in this case, should I move this piece here? I asked. Correct, Lady Rosamond. Another established tactic is to move this other piece here. Having these strategies explained with visual demonstrations appeared to help Angelica a lot, and she even seemed moved by the fact that she was actually understanding things. So that's what the text meant there. If only they'd use Gwenning pieces during class, she murmured. So she's more of a demonstrational learner. Like she has to have someone show her how to do something to be able to understand it better than just by reading it. Okay. Both she and Cornelius were now more interested in battle tactics than ever before, since during class they only ever moved as their teacher instructed, without even thinking more deeply about what they were doing. Now they were playing with the Gwenning pieces while carefully cross-referencing with their books. Bridget glanced towards Daniel. Is this how you learned about tactics, she asked. My older brother taught me himself, so most of my knowledge on strategy comes from Gwenning. Gwenning was played quite frequently in the Knights Order, but since it required mana to play, it was mostly men nobles and archnobles who participated. It seemed that Bridget had found it somewhat strange that a lay noble like Daniel both owned a set and was using the pieces so casually. There was a huge Gwenning boom in the Royal Academy dorms back when my older brother lived there. I have heard that Lord Ferdinand used the pieces to craft strategic theories for the Interduchy Championships, Fabies hunts, and dinner games, which he then explained to others. It ended up being the case that everyone understood the strategies without ever needing to attend the lectures, Daniel explained, making me realize that he probably admired and respected Ferdinand so much in part due to how much his older brother must have spoken about him. But seriously, the more I learned about Ferdinand, the more confident I became that he really can do anything. He more than likely could. I imagine that by the time Lady Rosamond goes to the Royal Academy, everyone will already be using karate and picture books. These are simply that effective, Bridget said. If you ask me, you should raise the price even higher when selling them to other duchies. Establishing such large-scale trends will strengthen Ehrenfest's position in the country. I haven't learned much about the country we're in. Is Ehrenfest a completely weak duchy? Or comparatively weak duchy? At the moment, I would say that we are right in the middle of the hierarchy, largely due to having maintained a neutral position during the Civil War. Ehrenfest was currently higher up in the hierarchy thanks to not having been too disadvantaged by the Civil War. Prior to that, had you ranked the 25 duchies. The 25 duchies that existed at the time by power, it would have been significantly closer to the bottom. Ooh. That said, Ehrenfest has risen in the hierarchy exclusively because the duchies that lost the Civil War now have less political influence, Bridget continued. In other words, its position does not mean it has any real influence itself. I see. In that case, I think we should keep the teaching materials as hidden as we can from the other duchies and make it our goal to boost Ehrenfest's educational standards as much as we can. I later told Sylvester and Ferdinand about Bridget's assertion that the teaching materials could strengthen Ehrenfest's political influence. To Sylvester, this was like a dream come true, especially considering how unstable the current balance of power was. At the feast celebrating the return of spring, he gave a strict order to all Ehrenfest nobles not to discuss their children's better learning standards, how much they had developed over the winter, or that the Gilberta Company was selling the materials. He also made it clear that those bringing the materials to the Royal Academy were not to take them out of their dorm rooms under any circumstances. Yeah, because other kids from other duchies are going to be there. Once the feast was over, the kids got together for one last gathering as they sadly prepared to leave. I had the lay noble parents sign an agreement to treat the materials well, but seeing the children's smiles as they hugged the borrowed picture books and toys in their chests immediately eased any lingering concerns. Lady Rosamond, I will have prepared many more stories for you by next winter, I promise. Please do, Feline. I myself am quite looking forward to the new picture books. Do your best to write and learn as much as you can. At that, the Giebs and the nobles living on Giebland all departed for their respective provinces. Angelica, meanwhile, would instead be returning to the Royal Academy. She had shown clear signs of development over the past few days, so all I wanted was for her to keep doing was her best. I will return every Earth Day, she said. Do listen to your lectures, and please practice with the Karata and Gwenin. And so Angelica headed back to the Royal Academy with the Karata picture books and Gwinin. That's how you say it. Okay, never mind. Gwinin said that her parents had brought for her. They had almost been moved to tears when their daughter unexpectedly asked for something to help in her studies, so much so they quickly bought every kind of material available. As the number of nobles steadily decreased, Ferdinand and I returned to the temple to perform the winter coming-of-age ceremony and the spring baptism ceremony. On the day after that, there was a meeting with the Blue Priest to decide who would be going where during spring prayer, with Ferdinand posting his planned route for all to see. He and I would be splitting up and covering the central district by ourselves. Once the meeting was over, Ferdinand needed to discuss the more precise details of spring prayer and the gathering with me. I was resting in my room in the meantime. As I sipped the tea that Nicola had prepared, she placed a plate of sweets in front of me. You have been ever so busy lately, Lady Rosamine. How is your health? As of right now, I'm doing okay. But all of you are going to be accompanying me during spring prayer, and there will be many busy days of traveling by carriage. It will no doubt be tough, though I hope not too tough. Of course, milady. A bell rang then from the other side of the door. Ferdinand promptly entered alongside Zom, who was carrying a bunch of documents. Fran, Zom, spread out this map. We shall be traveling by high beach just as we did last year, visiting winter mansions in the morning and afternoon. The fact that we are staying within the central district this time should give us more leeway. I'm surprised that Rosamine hasn't asked him where is Arno at, because she hasn't seen him at all since this whole thing involving her getting adopted happened. Once Fran and Zom had prepared the map of the duchy, Ferdinand started shooting out instructions about spring prayer. During the meeting, he had made it sound as though the two of us would be dividing the land evenly between ourselves. Oh, wait a minute. She knows that the climbing the towering staircase now means death, so once she asked him where Arno is, and he tells her that, then she'll realize that he is dead. But that's why I wonder why. But his current explanation involved me going across the entirety of the central district. Ferdinand, I had assumed that you would be handling these areas yourself and that I consequently wouldn't need to visit them all, I said, confused. Ferdinand looked at me with exasperation. We shall be traveling together, so of course you will need to. You would be able to piece that much together yourself. Furthermore, you were asked directly by the Archduke to travel across the entire region. Had you forgotten that? No, I remember, but the prayer only requires that we offer up a bunch of mana. Can't you do that alone? I think splitting the work between us will make things go a lot easier. We had traveled together during last year's spring prayer, and the journey had proven so brutal that I was forced to repeatedly use potions to recover my energy and mana. And yet Ferdinand shot down my suggestion with a single dismissive laugh. This is work that you were asked to do and agreed to. Therefore, it is yours and yours alone. I shall follow merely to ensure that you do not cause problems. Furthermore, the current plan is for you to gather your spring ingredient along the way, but it is more than possible that unexpected problems will arise as they did last autumn. It will be less of a headache for me to accompany you from the beginning rather than having to anxiously await an update or an Ordinon summoning me out of nowhere. Eep. Thank you for all your help back there, and please do accompany me during spring prayer as well, I said, remembering the disaster that had happened on the Naya Shutsaria. With Ferdinand there, disaster would be a lot less likely. Instantly, Rosamine. Eckert has said he would like to accompany us during spring prayer. Your thoughts? Eckert is your guard knight, so he would be accompanying us anyway, wouldn't he? You misunderstand. Since I will be traveling as a priest, I am not permitted to bring a guard knight with me. He would officially be accompanying us as your guard knight rather than mine. The cover story would be that Karlstedt, worried about his sweet little daughter leaving the noble's quarter to travel to duchy, had used his authority as the Order's commander to give me an additional guard. I see. Well, if we have to go through another battle for the spring ingredient, we'll want as many fighters as we can get. Precisely. Thus, I would like to bring Eckert with us, assuming this would not bother you. We will also need to bring a scholar with us to observe the state of Haas, but I imagine you will have no issue with justice, Ferdinand said. But despite having suggested justice himself, the name was accompanied by a very displeased grimace. I would be relieved to work alongside someone I know, but why are you making a face like that, Ferdinand? Because nothing good ever happens when justice gets eager. The discussion ended with a sigh from Ferdinand, and with that, the party we were taking with us on spring prayer was decided. You have a meeting with the Gilberta Company today, and I must say you certainly invited quite a few people, Fran said, as he walked toward my orphanage director's chambers. It simply had to be done. There is much we need to discuss and settle all at once, I replied with a smile. Today I had invited Karina and Thule, as well as the usual Benno, Mark, and Lutz. By the time we arrived at my chambers, the Gilberta Company was already there. Benno greeted me as a representative, and once he was done, I turned my gaze to Karina and Tuli. Karina, I wish for you to sew an outfit due by the next Starbind ceremony. But you have not yet come of age, Lady Rosemine. What is it you desire? Karina asked, blinking in surprise. I grinned. The clothes are not for me, but for my guard knight Bridget, I said, gesturing for her to come over. For me? I shall purchase an outfit that makes you look more beautiful than ever. That is my payment to you. At that, I guided the faltering Bridget to my hidden room. Oh, her payment for helping Angelica. Yeah, get her something that will help her find a man that she'll like. She nervously entered, having never been inside before. I also invited Karina to accompany us, and Tuli as her helper. Fran, please discuss the priest heading to Haas with Benno. As you wish. After leaving the rest of Fran, I brought Monica into my hidden room with the others. When I saw what you were wearing at last year's Starbind ceremony, Bridget, it occurred to me that I was not bringing out your beauty as much as it should have. Thus, I set out to create my masterpiece, an outfit that would suit a tall woman such as yourself. I took the design illustrations that Monica had been carrying for me and spread them out on the table for Bridget to see. This is known as a halter dress, recognizable by the design diagonal cuts that come down from the neck and leave the wearer's shoulders exposed. I intend to have ribbon or some kind of other material wrapped around the arms, serving as decorative sleeves, separate to the main gown. As far as halter dresses went, this was a more formal style not held up by cloth or straps. It looked the same on the back as it did the front, which ensured that the wearer wasn't too exposed. It clings to the body all the way down to the hips. The skirt then uses a lot of extra cloth to make it all fluttery, which should give the outfit all the fanciness it needs. As much as I would have preferred to put her in a simple fishtail dress to emphasize her good figure, noble outfits were required to use as an excessive amount of cloth. The dress was thus closely fitted at the torso and to emphasize Bridget's sizable bust and toned back, but also deliberately excessive below the waist. After all, it was best to avoid taboos when designing clothes for noble women. This is certainly a unique design, Karina observed. The current trend in noble fashion is for shoulders to be adorned with fluff, spreading the dress out horizontally, correct? While that might make slender girls on the smaller side look cuter, vertical lines would complement tall women like Bridget much better. So, what do you think, Bridget? If you don't like the dress, we don't have to make it. As I glanced Bridget's way, she returned a gentle smile. No, I like it. You thought up this design for my sake, Lady Rosemine, and I know more than anyone that the current trends do not suit me or other female knights. We put on clothes that do not look particularly good on us because we have no choice but to follow noble trends. But since this is a dress designed by the Archduke's adopted daughter, it will no doubt become a trend in itself, she replied, accepting my suggestion not only for herself, but for all the other female knights who shared her build. Karina, Tuli, I ask that you work with Bridget to pick the colors and cloth. Bridget, I shall put 5 large silvers of my money towards this. Should Angelica pass her exams, then I will offer 1 small gold. Please consider this while budgeting for the clothes. I placed ink and paper in front of Karina, saying that she could use it as she liked, and then handed Monica a magic tool resembling a gavel. Monica, once the measuring and decision are both complete, please strike here with this. It will make the face stone outside the door shine. Meanwhile, I will be discussing other matters with Benno. As you wish. Leaving these matters to Karina and Tuli, I exited the hidden room. The financial report on the teaching materials had already concluded outside, and it seemed they were almost done deciding on the means by which to take the priest to Haas. The discussion had overall gone smoothly since the journey back and forth had been made so many times already. Lady Rosemine, I recently visited Haas to see the current state of affairs, Mark began. According to his explanation, following lengthy discussions that had taken place throughout the winter, the mayor's faction had ended up isolated. To farmers, the spring prayer not being performed is the same as being abandoned by the Archduke. Anyone who hears that his wrath is only being contained by the new High Bishop, his own daughter, would naturally shift to supporting her over the mayor. The farmers around Haas cursed the mayor's thoughtlessness and collectively decided that it was better to rely on the Archduke's adopted daughter, the new High Bishop. The citizens in the enclosed winter mansion had all descended into a massive panic upon being informed that the former High Bishop was dead, that Continent was no longer overseeing the town, and that the attack on the monastery was being viewed as an attack on the archducal family. It seems that the citizens had considered the monastery to be something built without permission by the new High Bishop, not realizing that such ivory buildings are constructed by the archducal family. They all said that they had no intention of attacking the Archduke and had simply been following the mayor's orders. Speaking of which, since we spread the rumor that someone would need to take responsibility, the mayor has been living quietly and in fear all winter. It was apparently common knowledge to the city of Ehrenfest that nobles lived in ivory buildings, which were never to be touched under any circumstances. I hadn't known this since I never went outside, but everyone else was apparently aware. Thank you for looking into all this, Mark. It is my honor to be of use to you. I took it upon myself to preemptively spread the rumor that the Archduke would be sending knights and scholars come spring to arrest those responsible. So I imagine that they are currently experiencing stress and agony beyond words, Mark said with a dark smile. Strong loyalty sure can make people do scary things, huh? I thought, averting my gaze and instead glancing toward Fran. He held on a cold smile himself. I would like to once again ask the city guards to accompany the priest to Haas for safety's sake. Let's please deliver this to the commander of the East Gate, I said, handing Lutz a letter detailing my request. I had considered giving it to Thule, but in the public, it would be pretty bizarre for me to give such a letter to a seamstress's apprentice. As you wish. It was then that the facestone on the hidden room's door lit up, indicating that Bridget's measurements had been taken. I opened the entrance for them, and the four stepped out. As Bridget informed me what kinds of cloth and colors she had ordered, I glanced at Thule. We exchanged a smile upon making eye contact, but there was no reason for me to speak to her here. I desperately worked my head to come up with some excuse. And that concludes the order, Bridget said. I see. I'm glad to hear that you liked it. Now then, Karina, I imagine I will be quite the task to put together such a unique outfit, but I trust your abilities. And Thule. Thule shot her head up with a beaming smile. Please design a hairpin to match Bridget's hair and her dress. I will summon you two again when spring prayer is over, I said, wanting to have a more relaxed conversation with her when we weren't so busy with the upcoming spring prayer. Thule grinned, guessing my intentions, and then took out a box. Lady Rosamond, would you like a spring hair stick? I made one during the winter for you to wear during spring prayer. But of course, I replied. How could I ever refuse? The hair stick that she took out was primarily adorned with blooming renfrew flowers, which were like white crocuses that announced the coming of spring. It was also decorated with a bunch of leaves, the color of which ranged from yellow to dark green. Once Thule had put the hair stick in for me, I shook my head a little, causing the vine-like string of decorative leaves to sway through the air. It looks wonderful on you, Thule said with a smile. I love that smile just as much as I loved my new hair stick. Ooh, Haas's punishment! Before we left for spring prayer, the priest headed to Haas in carriages that were provided by the Gilberta Company and guarded by soldiers. This time, all the soldiers were lined up at the temple's back entrance, which was the front entrance from the lower city's perspective, because they heard rumors that Dad was being assigned to every one of these trips, because he had taken it upon himself to travel all the way to the temple to greet priests. Gunter, I ask for your assistance once again, I said with a broad smile as Dad knelt before me, a serious expression on his face. You may count on me. I will ensure that everyone arrives safely. You have my trust. May we meet again in Haas. While I was speaking to the soldiers, Martha and Delia were saying their cheerful goodbyes, having gotten very close over the winter. Thor and Rick on the other. What the fuck is wrong with me? On the other hand, looked beyond excited to be returning to Haas, while the priest newly assigned to the monastery looked nervous to be leaving Ehrenfest for the first time. In the morning, a couple of days later, carriages transporting Ferdinand's and my attendants and chefs headed to Haas as well. The 2-day gap was to account for a letter that Benna was delivering to Haas's mayor, outlining the date on which we would be arriving to punish those guilty of treason. We did not need to wait for a response since it was an official decree with the Archduke's seal. I would be heading to Haas by high beast since come fifth bell, and by that time the letter would likely have already arrived. The citizens were probably too scared and anxious to even think about eating lunch right now. In all honesty, I didn't feel so great either. I was being forced to announce the city's crimes and condemn the mayor. Still thinking about Haas's future, I set down my pen and passed a stack of writing-covered paper to Fritz. This is the text for the winter prep picture book. Please deliver it to Wilma and request that she finish the illustrations while I'm performing spring prayer. I had already asked Fritz and Gail to finish the autumn and winter picture books by the Starbound ceremony, which took place halfway through summer. The autumn's volume's illustrations were mostly completed, with only the printing needing to be done now, but I had only just written the text for the winter volume. With most of my attendants having been sent out early in the morning, the only ones left in my chambers were Fritz, who would be managing the workshop, and Fran, who would be riding with me on my high beast. There were also several of the Grey Priests who normally worked in the workshop with us, all of whom had experience serving Blue Priests. This wasn't coincidental, but it was rather the result of a deliberate effort, since Ferdinand would be eating lunch here, having sent his attendants and chefs to Haas already. So, Fran, how is the food coming along, I asked. I'm sure Hugo is doing just fine, but I wanted to make sure. Since Ella had departed for spring prayer, today's lunch was being prepared by Hugo and another helper, with Frida and the Guildmaster's permission. He had now finished training his replacement for the Italian restaurant, and so had jumped at the opportunity to help out here and strengthen his relationship with the Archduke's adopted daughter. It is an unfamiliar kitchen to him, but since it's not too dissimilar from the one in the orphanage director's chambers, he is doing just fine. The High Priest will certainly be satisfied as well. Eckert and Justice too, I would imagine. It hadn't been necessary for me to invite Eckert and Justice to eat, since we would be leaving at fifth bell after a post-lunch break. But they had already sent me an ordonnance expressing how much they were looking forward to enjoying the food here, so declining hadn't really been an option. More importantly, Lady Rosamine, you will want to write the other letters soon if you wish to finish before the High Priest arrives, Fran observed, and he was right. I got to writing the letter that I wanted Hugo to deliver to Frida. In it, I thanked her for lending us the 2 chefs, and added a seasonal menu for the Italian restaurant, noting that I will be coming to eat there once spring prayer was over. Once I was done, I sealed the letter and gave it to Fritz. Give this to Hugo when paying him for his work, if you would. Tell him that I wish for him to deliver it to Frida. A small ringing came from beyond the door, indicating the arrival of a visitor. It was the bell for Ferdinand. Fran opened the door, and in he came with Zom, Eckert, and Justice. My apologies for pushing lunch preparations onto you, Rosamine. It's okay, you are allowing me to travel to Haas by Haybeast despite it being selfish to do so. You have my gratitude, Ferdinand. Eckert followed in behind Ferdinand with a broad grin, and sorry for having you prepare extra for us. Is it mean of me to wish that he looked at least a little guilty about this? He's so big of an eater as Karlstad. After finishing a meal made by Hugo for the first time in ages, it was time to drink tea prepared by Fran and discuss the upcoming visit to Haas. We needed to get Eckert and Justice up to date on the situation, so once I had made sure that everyone was touching the sound-blocking magic tools provided by Ferdinand, I started to explain. After all, the root cause of our problems had been my enthusiasm to spread printing via monasteries with orphanages and workshops that would be easy for me to visit. I was a fool, I began. At the time I had only just been baptized and knew very little about how noble society functioned. I was so ignorant that I assumed we were going to hire construction workers from the lower city to build the orphanage and workshop from the ground up. And maybe we would have, had those been the only things I asked for. But no, I asked for a miniaturized temple. And since that meant Blue Road priests with noble blood would be visiting it, noble customs demanded that the monastery be constructed as an ivory building. Had I known more about nobles, I wouldn't have asked for a monastery. I wouldn't have made such a request during a meal that I had invited others to. Ferdinand nodded. I imagined that Sylvester would not have acted so hastily either had he not been so satisfied with the food. I should have given your limited familiarity with noble culture more consideration. It was normally his job to put a stop to Sylvester and me when we got ahead of ourselves, but at the time he assumed that I had placated both Sylvester and him with food to make my demands from a position with more leverage. On the inside, he had even been happy to see me acting more like a noble, making use of plots and manipulation. Truly incredible misunderstandings could occur when 2 people considered a situation from their own unique perspective. As a result, a monastery was constructed in Haas the very same day. Eckert widened his eyes in surprise at the deep lore behind the monastery, while Justice leaned forward with excitement. Oh, the truth is always full of surprises, huh? That's why gathering information never gets old. So what problems did this bring about? Tell me everything. Craftsmen from the lower city had worked together to finish Haas's monastery and make it livable for the priests. I had tried taking the orphans inside as well, thinking that doing so would save them from brutal mistreatment while also lessening Haas's burdens. We did save 2 girls who were about to be sold to nobles, as well as their brothers, but my actions put Haas in an extremely dangerous position. I didn't even know until people from the Gilberta Company told me that Haas's orphans were considered the shared property of everyone in the city. Who could blame you for not knowing how orphans are treated there? Here in Ehrenfest, children orphaned after their baptisms are looked after by their workplace, Justice said, earning him a surprised look from Eckert. It seemed that it wasn't normal for nobles to know how commoners' orphans were treated elsewhere. Unfortunately, Haas's mayor believed that he could do anything with the former High Bishop's support. He mistakenly assumed that he had a powerful backer, and thus attacked the monastery in order to retrieve the girls. Unbelievable. But the monastery is an ivory building that was constructed by Lord Ferdinand himself, Eckert exclaimed, his voice cracking a little in shock. I nodded. Ivory buildings for nobles to live in could only be made by members of the archducal family, who had his explicit permission, and so attacking one was treated the same as attacking the archducal family. I hadn't known that either, but ignorance of the law was no excuse. No one was harmed thanks to the monastery's protection magic, but nonetheless, Haas had committed treason. Then they must be destroyed at once, Eckert exclaimed again, whipping out his staff and rising from his seat, but Ferdinand stopped him with a sigh. Calm yourself, Eckert. I'm using Haas as a learning experience for Rosamine. Do not destroy it before she has gotten as much as she can out of this opportunity. You are using it as a learning experience? Indeed, now that Haas has committed treason, it is a city with no future. It matters not whether it is destroyed or saved, Ferdinand said with a laugh. This makes it the perfect opportunity for Rosamine to learn how to use her human resources, maneuver matters to reach her desired goal, punish criminals, and understand the consequences that her actions have. I gave her a task. If she does not wish to see Haas destroyed, it is up to her to engineer the development of a faction that opposes the mayor, and isolates him as a traitor. What we will be doing here is executing the mayor and his faction. You need not destroy them yourself. Eckert frowned in confusion and looked at me. But commoners who would attack an ivory building are a plague to society. They do nothing but harm. Removing them from this world not the just thing to do? Rosemine, what in the world are you protecting them for? As one could probably tell from Eckert's words, my perspective on this world was entirely different from that of the noble. I tilted my head in thought and tried to explain the reasoning behind my actions, even though I did not expect him to emphasize with them. I was raised to believe that rulers existed to protect their citizens. I do not understand what line of thinking made you just so readily want to destroy an entire city of people you were supposed to be protecting. Once you kill someone, they are gone forever. It is not better to let them live and repent for their mistakes? Let them live? To what end? Eckert asked, furrowing his brow in confusion. He sincerely did not seem to understand what I was talking about. The heck? Commoners pay taxes to nobles, do they not? You can thus benefit from keeping them alive. The punishment I suggested to Sylvester was raising their taxes for 10 years. It seems like commoners and nobles are just fundamentally different, Eckert replied, stroking his chin in thought. He knew that I had been raised as the daughter of a soldier, so it seemed that he was chalking this up to our distinct backgrounds. You are correct that the Archduke protects his citizens. He gives them somewhere to live and ensures that the land is filled with mana. However, while commoners are accepted as citizens and allowed to stay here in return for paying taxes, what matters most is their obedience. There is no need to keep traitors alive who do not pay the Archduke the respect and gratitude that he is owed. The Archduke used his mana to revitalize the earth, both making and securing land for people to live on. It was apparently normal for those in the duchy who rose up against nobles, despite being kept alive by their grace and mana, to be executed on the spot. There are over 1,000 people who live in and around Host, and even if you exclude the farmers who weren't directly involved in the attack, that still leaves more than 200 people, I responded. Were Host to be destroyed, would you not receive less taxes? Would it not ultimately disadvantage both the Archduke and the nobles? Trying to convince a noble on moral grounds wouldn't work, nor would trying to explain that commoners follow different values. Thus I launched an attack on the basis of material losses, taxes. But sadly, even that had no effect whatsoever. It would not disadvantage us at the moment, Ferdinand replied instantly. It really wouldn't be a problem at all, Justice added. They had both replied so quickly that for a second I could only blink in surprise. Ferdinand furrowed his brow in displeasure, then continued. We presently lack nobles and priests, and we do not have enough mana to fully vitalize the earth. We are being forced to spread our mana as thin as possible to preserve the lives of our citizens. We may have a bit more leeway with mana now that you have entered the temple and are performing spring prayer, but there are still more commoners exhausting mana than there are nobles providing it. In this regard, losing a single city would not pose any problem whatsoever. In fact, it would be beneficial to us. Hold on a second, I exclaimed, reflexively standing up in sheer disbelief at what I just heard. Do not stand so abruptly. It is unsightly, Ferdinand scolded, glaring at me before continuing. I have listened to your point of view, and out of respect, I did not execute that rude, foolish man on the spot. Is this not to your benefit, allowing you to save the rest of the city as you please? My first thought was to call Ferdinand cruel or even monstrous, but the reality was that he was being the most considerate of all the nobles here. He had listened to my opinion and was doing all he could to accommodate it, but Eckert did not seem to be too fond of seeing Ferdinand restrained in this way, and was glaring at me with dissatisfaction. Rosemine, the world will be better off without fools who bear weapons against the archducal family, the same people who keep them alive. There is no need to burden yourself with saving them. It will be better to wash your hands of the matter and get rid of them entirely. Nah, Eckert, Justice chimed in. I think Milady's got the right idea of squeezing them dry over the next decade. It takes a lot of years before commoners are old enough to pay taxes. So we really don't want to lose too many of them. You know how quickly commoners die when even a minor disease starts to spread. We got a plan for that kind of thing. For a tax official, his answer was pretty much in character. Dang it. I slumped my shoulders over sadly. It seemed impossible for me to ever get used to how nobles thought about things. I believe it is about time for us to leave for Host. We shall execute the mayor's faction as traitors, and in the process, see how many people that plot of yours has moved. Rosemont, I can only hope that the anti-mayor faction has significantly grown in numbers, Ferdinand said with a sneer. It was like a vice was squeezing my head. I feel so bad for mine. Her values are being essentially squashed. We brought in our high beast at the temple's front gate. Fran and Zom would be sitting in the back seat of my panda bus, while Bridget would be in the front with me. At this point, it was as though Leslie's passenger seat existed basically just for her. Milady, mind me loading the stuff onto your high beast, Justice asked, having a gray priest carrying over a large box that had a very intense-looking lock on it. It was big enough for an adult man to just barely be able to carry, which made it both too bulky to put on a traditional high beast and the perfect size for me to sit on. Certainly, go ahead. I don't mind. Fran and Zon put the box into Leslie for me, but when I went in to get in myself, Justice came over with a broad smile on his face. Please allow me to ride in your fine high beast as well, milady. Justice, Ferdinand shouted, his voice striking Justice like thunder. The exact same thing had happened during the Harvest Festival. Does Justice seriously never learn? I wondered to myself. But upon seeing me hang my head, he simply broadened his smile. This box has been entrusted to me, and I cannot leave it unattended. You know how valuable it is, don't you, Lord Ferdinand? Do you really think it would be acceptable not having a scholar on standby, Justice asked, puffing at his chest as if proud of the plot he had concocted. What is he planning? At that, Ferdinand's expression darkened as though he was holding back the urge to let out a tremendous roar. Both he and Justice glared at each other for about 10 seconds, and Ferdinand finally turned his gaze out to me. Rosamine, pay no mind to Justice during the journey. If you allow him to distract you, then you will all surely fall from the sky. And that means I get Lord Ferdinand's permission. Let me in, milady. What? That was him giving his permission? I looked between Ferdinand, who had now turned around to his own high beast, and Justice, who was urging me on. Having no other choice, I opened the door into Leslie. Fran, please teach him how to fasten his seatbelt, as you wish. Once the excited Justice had leaped into my high beast, we departed. But he was asking so many questions about the interior that it was honestly kind of annoying. I politely answered his questions at first, but Ferdinand's warning that we would fall for the sky was starting to feel increasingly legitimate. Justice, you are distracting me. Please be silent. In that case, milady, this is my last question. By what means did you create a high beast like this? I'm not sure how to answer that. I just envisioned it and then made it. That's a shame. I wanted one for myself if possible. Oh, dear. Our journey to Haas didn't take much time at all, and we arrived in the blink of an eye. As we landed on the plaza like we had done during the Harvest Festival, the people spread out to make space for us. But unlike before, they all knelt once they had stepped back, and the brief glimpses that I had caught of their faces revealed nothing but grim expressions. The children appeared to have caught on to the heavy atmosphere as well, since they weren't chattering among themselves as well. Instead, clinging to their parents anxiously or kneeling like the adults. I pressed my lips together tightly at the looming sense of dread. It was clear that everyone understood the situation. Would it really be possible to finish matters here with only the mayor's death? I glanced up at Ferdinand as he walked slightly ahead of me, but I couldn't glean his intentions. We have been waiting since receiving the letter from the Gilberta Company, Rick said. He was kneeling atop the stage in between several others who were likely the chiefs of the neighboring farming towns. I could guess that Rick had managed the Winter Mansion in the mayor's place due to his punishment, so it made sense that he would be the one greeting us as well. Honorable High Bishop and High Priest, welcome to the city of Haas, Rick continued. I thank Flutrain, the goddess of water, for this meeting from the bottom of my heart. We returned slight nods upon receiving his polite greeting for nobles. Rick looked up, and given my height, we made direct eye contact. High Bishop, that is Haas. You have my sympathy, Rick, but as the letter said, Haas must be punished. No matter what I might say to the Archduke, that fact will not change, I said. At that, I turned to face the gathered commoners holding a voice-amplifying magic tool, much like the one that had been used during the Hearthstone recital. Attention, people of Haas. Attacking the monastery has been deemed an act of treason against the Archducal family. I asked for my adopted father to spare you, but the fact remains that a crime has been committed. A crime so severe that even a noble will be punished for it. In this case, the mayor led the attack with the assistance of many citizens. Under normal circumstances, the entire city would be viewed as a hive of dangerous rebels and subsequently destroyed in its entirety. The crowd began to stir. I heard some curse the mayor, others exclaimed that they had nothing to do with him, and still others grumbled that it wasn't fair to punish them as well. However, I know that Haas supports many farmers who mostly live in neighboring farming towns. I imagine that some of you were blackmailed or deceived by the mayor. I pleaded with the Archduke not to destroy the entire city for the crimes of a few, and he ultimately agreed to rethink the punishment I announced. I heard a few shocked murmurs, and then the pale expressions in the crowd quickly started to give way to smiles. I hurriedly continued before their hopes swelled too much. He rethought the punishment, but that is all. Haas will not escape unscathed. Your punishment shall be 10 years of increased taxes, and no priest will be sent here for spring prayer this year. I have saved your lives, but the punishment is by no means a light one. Forgive me for being incapable of doing more. Cheers spread through the crowd. I saw some people sighing in relief, and others joyfully hugging each other. Not getting wrapped up in something we didn't do is all that matters. Thank you very much, High Bishop, Rick said. But as the crowd grew excited, Ferdinand calmly stepped forward and took the voice-amplifying magic tool away from me. He then spoke into it with his cold, cold voice. Deliver the traitors to us. They shall be executed. In an instant, the silence fell over the crowd. It was so quiet that I felt as though I could even hear the sounds of people swallowing nervously. Rick shut his eyes tightly and then nodded. As you wish. Yeah, you're not getting out of this. The door of judgment. Rick excused himself, leaving to fetch the mayor. A short while passed before he returned. When he did, the mayor was brought onto the stage by 2 men who were holding him by the arms. He looked thin and somewhat pitiful wearing his ragged clothes, but this was actually pretty standard for commoners. And while he was unsteady on his feet, I didn't see any signs that he had been beaten over the winter. In fact, it did not seem as though he had been treated that poorly at all. The mayor knelt before me, raising his head to meet me, my gaze before quickly lowering it again. While I only saw his narrowed eyes for a second, there was a nasty gleam in them. I could feel the distinct air of arrogant condescension, his transient expression making it clear that he intended to exploit me to escape his punishment, since I was just a compassionate little girl. If the me from a year ago was up here, I never would have noticed that look. Good thing you did notice it. I had now spent a year getting knocked about in noble society, having to carefully observe Ferdinand's stony expression and Florencia's calm smile to catch even a glimpse of the true emotions hidden beneath their facades. It seemed that all this practice had made me a little more attentive to things like this when, while I wasn't particularly happy about the method, it had at least helped me avoid getting exploited. High Bishop, I simply did not understand my actions, the mayor began, in a pained voice, keeping his head lowered as he defended himself. He went on to speak at length about how he hadn't realized that attacking the monastery would be considered treason, but that was a lie. When Fran had told Rick about the monastery attack during the Harvest Festival, the blood had drained from his face, and there was no chance that the mayor's assistant would know something that the mayor himself did not. The truth was, he had just intended to smooth over his crime as using the former High Bishop's influence. He knew that it was a grave offense, which was why he had waited until Rick was away from the city to order the attack. As I listened, feelings of complete disgust slowly started to build up in my chest. Ferdinand was standing one step behind me, and I can only imagine the blood-chilling expression on his face. Just the thought was enough to make a shudder run down my spine. Enough. Since when were you under the impression that ignorance would excuse your crime? Ferdinand said, cutting down the mayor's defense in one fell swoop. The mayor looked up at Ferdinand in surprise, failing to find any words. He then locked his eye on me, having no doubt concluded that I would be easier to convince, and resumed his defense. O benevolent High Bishop who saved Haas from destruction, everything I did was to protect my humble city. It is only now that I understood the severity of my ignorance, and asked for your mercy so that I might live with virtue to atone for my sin. His grandiloquence was about what you would expect from someone who was in a position of leadership. He knew how to pick his words, speaking in a manner that quickly persuaded those listening to sympathize with his situation. Several people in the crowd even started to speak up, asking for my mercy. This isn't good. An uncomfortable chill washed over me. My goal here was to save as many people in Haas as possible by sacrificing their mayor, but there was a chance that those who tried to defend his actions would end up getting executed as well. Are you not a saint who shows mercy even to orphans, High Bishop? The mayor asked confidently, elaborating on what I had done for Haas's orphans, and openly praying that I show him the same consideration. Rick looked sick to his stomach, his face making it clear that he wanted to tell the mayor to shut up already. He edged slightly toward him, but then immediately stopped in place, having turned completely pale. I could guess he intended to stop the mayor from continuing his act, only to be glared at by Ferdinand. A moment later, I felt a tap on my back. I gracefully turned and looked up to see Ferdinand, whose gaze was so intensely cold that it actually made me flinch. He was still forcing his lips into a calm smile, but there was not an ounce of warmth in his expression as he silently pressured me to finish this already. Well then, what should I do now? I needed to think of a way to lead this safely into the mayor's execution while preserving my saintly image. After watching the mayor for a second, who was now waving his arms around as he expounded on his pleas, I lowered my gaze. Mayor, you speak of mercy, but do you not beat Haas's orphans each and every day? Both Thor and Rick were covered in bruises when I took them from you, I began. Nora and Marth had both been reasonably well fed, no doubt because he was going to sell them, but Thor and Rick had been malnourished and were clearly the victims of regular physical abuse. I do not see the need to show compassion to one who exploits their power to abuse the weak. Oh, that gives your saintly thing as well. I could see the panic in the mayor's eyes, and he quickly began to ramble in a desperate attempt to smooth things over and get some sort of compromise from me. That is, this was simply punishment. I would not have harmed them in such a way had they not committed such immoral acts. It is not normal to punish those who deserve it. I don't quite understand what immoral act would need to have them taken place to warrant violence. Say Thor or Rick had attacked your family. Would that be enough to warrant such a punishment, I asked, placing a hand on my cheek and innocently tilting my head, playing the part of a sheltered child ignorant of the world. The mayor nodded over and over, eagerly rubbing his hands together. The carnivorous glint in his eyes as he tried his best to sway me was actually kind of scary. That is clearly an immoral act, the mayor agreed. Were the orphans to attack my family, I would be furious and, of course, punish them by violence. Nobody would fault me for that, since the orphans must understand that they are only being kept alive through my goodwill. Rick, now kneeling behind the mayor, closed his eyes tightly and hung his head. The town chiefs kneeling around him were also rinsing at the irony. I looked at the mayor head on, then asked my final question. Had the orphans not understood that they were attacking your family, would you say the same even then? It would be unthinkable for the orphans to not recognize my family. Their lives would not excuse their crimes. I let out a sigh and whispered, "Too bad." Before turning, I looked up at Ferdinand. The mayor has made his position clear. Ferdinand's cold eyes narrowed further, and his lips curved into a slightly broader grin. I see. He certainly has made his position clear, he said, taking a step forward. I, in turn, took a step back, granting Ferdinand the right to speak. You maintain the one who attacks a building constructed by the Archduke for his daughter should inarguably be punished. Nobles live in ivory buildings, which are constructed using the Archduke's power. This is a fact known by all. No, I truly was not aware, the mayor trailed off, faltering again now that he had to deal with Ferdinand. Ha ha, can't deal with this one. His face began to pale, and his grandiloquence from before vanished in an instant. He looked my way, desperately seeking my help, but I refused to acknowledge him. Ferdinand took another step forward, cornering the mayor even more. Mayors must deal with nobles, and it would be unthinkable for you to not know something so basic. You made your citizens attack the monastery, knowing the gravity of your crime. What you did not know was that the former high bishop had died before he could disguise it and provide his protection. The mayor widened his eyes in shock. That is simply not. He began desperately trying to find an escape, but the people in the crowd who had moments before supported him were now regarding him with dispassionate eyes. I could guess that he had spent the winter convincing them that he hadn't known what he was doing. But regardless, it would not matter even if you truly had not known. The actions taken by the people of Haas were nothing less than an attack on the Archducal family, and that is treason. Treason must be punished, and none can fault the Archduke for ordering said punishment. Commoners must have it drilled into them that they are kept alive only by the grace of the nobility. This is the position you yourself just exposed. But I tire of your dishonest excuses. Speak no further, Ferdinand said flatly, silencing the mayor's protest. He then returned to my side, where he looked down at me with the same harsh expression that he had given the mayor. Rose mine. I instinctively straightened my back, sensing that he was going to lecture me. Seeing that, Ferdinand let out an exaggerated sigh, then spoke in a chilly voice with an intentionally villainous look. You pleaded for the Archduke to lighten his sentence on the basis that the people of Haas understood the gravity of the crime and were deeply remorseful. It seems to me, however, they do not understand at all, Ferdinand said, looking from the mayor to the gathered crowd. Everyone tensed up as his eyes scanned them, and silence fell over the plaza. Rosamund, you are known as the Saint of Ehrenfest. Do you still believe that Haas deserves your mercy? At least the kids do. The kids didn't do anything wrong. The atmosphere froze over as the citizens realized that the lightened punishment I had spoken of could be taken back with a single word. A silence so heavy that people were afraid to move at all blanketed the plaza as they waited to hear what Ferdinand would say next. But amid the crushing pressure so intense that one might even hesitate to breathe, Rick slowly looked up as if pushing up against weights holding him down. "O honorable high priest, O honorable high bishop, I ask for permission to speak," he said in a trembling voice. He was so nervous that he had started to sweat, making his pale face glisten slightly and his hair stick to his forehead. "You may speak," Ferdinand said. Rick expressed his utmost gratitude, then continued. "High priest, we, the people of Haas, truly understand the gravity of the crimes that the mayor ordered us to commit. Under normal circumstances, our entire city would have already been destroyed, and we cannot thank the saint enough for granting us her mercy and sparing our lives. The mayor is the only one who does not understand. We are not like him. I can assure you," he said, quivering under Ferdinand's pressure as he desperately tried to protect his fellow citizens. I would wonder if he's actually using the crushing on them, but I doubt it. His courage touched my heart. That was when I felt a tap on my back from Ferdinand, who was still strictly glaring down at Rick. I looked up and he shot me a look that seemed to say, "What is your role here again?" Right, I'm supposed to be a saint. As moved as I was, now wasn't the time for me to stand around. I stepped in front of Rick and spun around, spreading my arms wide as if to protect him from Ferdinand. "High priest, I believe Rick's words. The people understand the gravity of their crime. I know it." High bishop came incredibly moved voices from both Rick and the town chiefs. The admiration and gratitude in their eyes made me feel so guilty that I could barely stand it. I just wanted to scream, I can't be a saint, this is all too much, and run off the stage, but I was facing Ferdinand as he played the part of an evil final boss. Merciless expression at all. I couldn't just run away. This too was part of the assignment that he had given me so long ago. Ferdinand shook his head while deliberately facing me. "Rosamund, kindness at times is more harm than good. You must pluck the seeds of rebellion before they grow into carnage. High priest, the people of Haas are planning no rebellion. There is nothing to fear. Isn't that right, everyone?" I asked, turning around to face Rick, the town chiefs, and the crowd. Rick immediately said, of course, and loud crowds of agreement came from all over the plaza. You can hear them for yourself, High Priest, so please. But just as I thought I had settled the matter, Ferdinand suddenly raised his right hand to shoulder height. Then I shall have them prove it. Huh? Sorry, I have no idea what's happening right now. Are you expecting me to do something? At least give me a sign! As I panicked on the inside, not knowing what to do, Ferdinand whipped out his staff. I shall thoroughly pluck the seeds of rebellion, he announced, then muttered, Getelt? Whatever, and swung his staff. A transparent amber barrier appeared beneath the stage, a little ways into the plaza. Shitsaria's shield. It had the same decorative patterns, but while the shield I made when praying to Shitsaria was round, the one that Ferdinand had produced was a thin rectangle that resembled a door, wide enough for two adults to walk through while standing beside one another. They shall attempt to pass through this door of judgment. Those who truly regret what has occurred shall be able to pass through without issue. Rick gazed at me with worry, but I knew how those things worked. A shield of Shitsaria would let anyone through who did not harbor malice or the intent to harm others. I looked him in the eyes and gave a reassuring nod. Rick, I am sure you will pass through without issue, I said. Determination filled Rick's eyes, and he stepped forward, climbing down the stairs and standing in front of the amber rectangle. As those in the crowd all held their breath, waiting to see what would happen, he walked toward the shield, and passed through with ease, despite looking a little scared at the very last moment. It is as you see, High Priest, he is a good man. It appears that Rick is trustworthy, but what about this one? Ferdinand mused, unsympathetically looking down at the mayor. Uh-oh. The mayor is not going to be able to do it! At that, Rick, as well as several of the town chiefs, grabbed the mayor and brought him down the stairs. Then they pushed him toward the door of judgment. As I expected, the mayor was knocked back by a strong wind, making him unable to pass through. Bands of light instantly shot from Eckerd's staff and bound him. Lord Ferdinand, I have detained the rebel. Good work. Rick had passed through the door of judgment, but the mayor had not. I heard a simultaneous gasp from everyone in the plaza as fear crept onto their faces. Those who had attacked the monastery no doubt realized that the same power had knocked them away in the past. Some even looked visibly sick. Rick, have all the citizens of Haas pass through the door, Ferdinand ordered. All those deemed a threat shall be executed. High Priest, I said, pulling on his sleeve to try and signal that this was unnecessary, but he was gazing between the gathered citizens and the bound, prone mayor with a harsh look in his eyes. Any number of these people could harbor the same ill intentions as this fool. Judgment shall be necessary if you do not wish for us to execute the entirety of the city. Do you not agree? I believe in the people of Haas. Surely judgment is not... Before I could say necessary, Ferdinand grinned. If those in Haas are as virtuous as you believe, then this judgment would pose no threat to them. Unable to argue with this logic, I had no choice but to concede. Then I suppose it must be done. Do you agree, Rick? I asked, not knowing what else to do but throw the ball in his court. He did not oppose the judgment, but instead accepted it with a smile. Yes, High Bishop, there is no problem with that at all. In the event that there are others who fail, I would rather they be removed than risk leading Haas into another crisis. We cannot allow ourselves to fall any further out of the Archduke's favor than we already have. Rick showed no hesitation in supporting the judgment and execution of any dangerous individuals who might commit further treason. His goal above all else was to save the city from destruction, so he just couldn't risk displeasing the Archducal family any more than they already have. Judgment shall reveal those worthy of receiving the Saint of Ehrenfest's mercy. As you saw, I passed through the door safely. If you do not wish to be executed as a rebel, then you must do the same, Rick declared. And so everyone in the plaza lined up to pass through the door. The town chiefs and the citizens of their towns went first, but since they hadn't participated in the attack, and the mayor had very little influence on them, they all passed through so easily that it was almost underwhelming. The city folk who had participated in the monastery attack, however, were evidently a lot more fearful. They faltered in front of the door of judgment, afraid that they would be knocked back like the mayor had been. Do not fret about those who cannot pass through, Ferdinand told Eckerd. You need only bind them as you did the mayor. Yes, sir, Eckerd replied, taking out his staff. The sight was enough to send a wave of panic surging through the citizens, causing some to swallow their fear and rush toward the door, yelling all the while, "Ah!" Several among the flowing stream of people were knocked back by the door, and Eckerd instantly detained them with bands of light. Once everyone had attempted to pass through the door of judgment faded, and 6 bound people were taken onto the stage. Ooh, no! Oh my god, how long have I been doing this? Only 49 minutes. Okay, I can keep going. The execution. Those rejected by the door harbored malice toward us. They shall be executed here and now, Ferdinand asked. As you wish. These men are all firmly in the mayor's faction. I have no defense for them. Rather, I am grateful that the door of judgment has proved the innocence of everyone else, Rick responded. Ferdinand knelt in front of me. My heart was pounding hard. The blood drained from my face as realization hit me that these people were about to be executed. It wasn't necessarily a surprise, since Ferdinand had said that the mayor would be executed from the very start. But now that it was happening before me, my heart thumped painfully and a cold sweat ran down my back. Rosemont, do not avert your gaze. Okay? Really? You're gonna make her watch? I know she needs to see some of this stuff firsthand, but watching you guys kill people? Does she really want to be scarred? Or do you really want to scar her for the rest of her life? Because, I mean, your freaking smile was scaring her enough to where she couldn't even sleep. Do you think she'll be able to sleep after this? I don't think so. Neither Rick nor anyone else in the plaza seemed to feel any sympathy for those who had been dragged them into this mess. Or, well, maybe this wasn't the right way to put it. They didn't seem to feel any disgust or hesitation toward them either. Everyone was simply acting like it was completely natural for those deemed to be traitors or harmful to the community to be executed. They were wrongdoers for putting the entire city at risk, and this was a just punishment. Justice. At once, Lord Ferdinand. Justice headed to the large box that had been brought onto the stage and opened the lock with a loud clink. Oh, we get to find out what's in the box! The front side of the box opened flat, revealing its contents. 5 shallow drawers stacked on top of each other like a makeshift filing cabinet. But from where I was standing, I couldn't see what was inside them. Ferdinand, what's in those drawers? Haas's identification medals. He was apparently referring to the citizenship medals that we stamped our blood onto during our baptism ceremonies. Wait, what happens? Are you going to destroy those? In the city of Aaronvest, the temple took care of registration, marriages, and cancellations due to death. But elsewhere, the registrations were all done during the Harvest Festival, with the mayor sending word upon the death of a citizen. Scholars in the castle managed the medals themselves, following reports from priests and tax officials to keep them all properly organized. We brought them all here since we did not know how many executions there would be, but in general they are not to be taken outside the castle, Ferdinand explained. I could guess it was like taking a box of confidential papers outside of a government office. In which case it made sense that the scholar in charge of them would need to stay close and keep a close eye out. Justice took out a piece of parchment and called out to Eckert, "Make sure nobody gets close." Eckert brought out his staff and transformed it into a sword before taking up position beside the box. He held his blade at the ready, prepared to cut down anyone who got close, which was enough to show just how valuable the box was. Justice began. As he wished, Lord Ferdinand. Justice gripped his staff and chanted, "Messer," turning it into a knife. With the sheet of parchment still in hand, he walked up to the light-bound traitors sprawled out on the stage, their faces twisting in fear as they watched his feet approach. A couple choked out hoarse cries for help, but nobody answered their calls as Justice knelt down to stamp the closest man's blood. The traitor's thumb was slightly pushed out between the bands binding him, at which point Justice pricked it with his knife. As the blood started seeping through, Justice pushed the fresh cut onto the parchment, producing a slow expanding red stain. Even though it wasn't happening to me personally, I could almost feel the pain as I watched the knife pierce the skin and draw blood. I wrapped my hand around my thumb in shared discomfort and shifted my focus so as to see as little of what was happening as possible. Once Justice had confirmed that the blood was firmly stamped against the parchment, he smoothly whipped his knife through the air. The slight amount of red that had been streaking down the blade seemed to disappear into thin air. Huh? The knife is clean again. Justice held up the blood-stained parchment to the crowd, proving that it had been stamped, which elicited cheers from the citizens and an approving nod from Ferdinand. He then headed to the next prone man, pressing his blood against the parchment, and showed the crowd again. This process repeated. Ferdinand, what in the world is Justice doing? Selecting the identification medals. It is the work of priests and scholars to handle them. For nobles, the identification stamping that was done during every baptism ceremony registered their mana. For commoners, however, it only registered their blood. That was why during my first baptism I had simply needed to press my blood against a white, flat-looking stone. I naturally hadn't written anything on it, nor had I even been asked my name. These medals were stored according to what year they had been registered, but beyond that, there was no quick way to identify whose was whose. They were instead usually tracked using blood during funerals that would place the medal on the body to ensure that it belonged to the person in question. To this end, Ferdinand had taken some of my blood to find my medal during mine's funeral. I hadn't noticed, though, because I was unconscious. For funerals held outside Aaronfest, some of the deceased's blood was smeared on a wooden board, which was then given to the scholar who visited the city during the Harvest Festival. They then sent the boards to the castle along with the collected taxes. These boards would be returned with the medals attached, which would then serve as grave markers. As Ferdinand explained the system to me, Justice walked over to the final person. "You won't get away with this," she cried, the only woman among the 6 traitors. She was the mayor's wife, glaring at us with hate in her eyes and tears streaming down her cheeks as the bands of light kept her bound. I mean, you didn't pass the test. It's not our fault. That's terrifying. As I continued to endure her intense glower, my throat bobbed, goosebumps rose on my arms, and my hands started to tremble a little. I wanted to step back and hide in Ferdinand's shadow, or at least look away, but I had been told that I needed to watch this entire execution. I had no choice but to keep looking at her, so I clenched my teeth and tightly clasped my hands, trying to at least stop them from shaking so visibly. As the wife and I continued staring at one another, Justice finished the blood stamp. He at least seemed entirely unfazed. With the last one complete, he wove his knife through the air while saying something and returned it to stab form. He then waved the stab around again, this time saying a swal, which made the blood stamp parchment ignite in golden flames like a magic contract. It flew over the box being guarded by Eckert, trailing fire behind it, and burned away into golden light that sprinkled down into the drawers. Instantly, the drawers started to rumble without anyone touching them. The topmost and second topmost ones both launched themselves open and shut, acting strangely until 6 metals suddenly shot out from within. Ooh! Odd cries could be heard from the crowd as the ivory metals used to register the people as citizens flew into the air before settling into Justice's hands. He looked over them carefully, then smoothly walked in front of Ferdinand and kneeled. Here are the medals, Lord Ferdinand. Justice held up the medals gracefully, and once Ferdinand had accepted them with a nod of gratitude, stood up and briskly returned to the box. He firmly clasped the lock back on it, then stood in front of it protectively. Rosamund, step back and stand by Justice, Ferdinand said, before waving his free hand to make a stab appear within it. I could guess he was about to use some magic, so I did as requested, leaving only Ferdinand standing in the center of the stage. He scanned the area as if to make sure there was nobody near, then held his staff high in the air. Mana poured from its tip, forming letters and complex designs in the air. This is my first time seeing this, Justice exclaimed, his brown eyes wider than usual and gleaming with joy. He was leaning forward slightly, absorbing as much as he could of the magic circle that Ferdinand was drawing in the air. Justice, what's about to happen? The execution of the traitors, milady. This is a spell taught only to Archduke candidates, so nobody is allowed near when it's being cast. That way, they can't hear the chant he's saying, or see the details of the complex magic circle, Justice explained. I know there existed a spell specifically for executing traitors, but I never gotten the opportunity to see it. This kind of thing is really rare, since usually nobody even thinks about acting against the Archduke. I'm so glad I wormed my way into coming along. Seeing Justice clench his fists and shake with excitement at the upcoming execution, I deeply understood why Ferdinand had given such a terrible grimace when he arrived to accompany us. I took a full step back. You'll be learning the spell yourself one day, milady. Please send word to me if you ever get the opportunity to use it. I will pray to the gods that such a day never comes. Nor shall I tell you if one does, I added silently before looking back at the execution. Ferdinand swung his staff as he stood at the center of the stage. He must have completed forming the magic circle with its mana by that point, as a black mist wavering like fire spewed out from within. Perhaps it was a spell connected to the god of darkness? It looked a lot like the mana-sucking black mist that I had seen during the ambush last year at Spring Prayer. So the dots weren't hard to connect. Keeping his eyes locked on the ominous black magic circle, Ferdinand's lips moved in a chant. He then tossed the medals into it. They stopped in midair as if sticking to the magic circle before getting completely enveloped by the black mist. Eckert, release their bindings. Yes, sir. At Ferdinand's order, Eckert quickly whipped his staff, making the light binding the 6 people disappear in the blink of an eye. And now freed traitors reacted in a variety of ways, some blinked in confusion, remaining sprawled on the ground, unsure of what was going on. Others screamed and tried to run, one of whom raced directly toward Ferdinand in an attempt to take him down with them. It was the mayor's wife. Ferdinand, I cried as I saw her sprinting toward him. He's fine! At the center of the stage, but despite my desperate cry, Ferdinand didn't even blink. He spoke with his eyes locked on the magic circle, not even sparing the woman a glance. Fear not, there is nothing they can do. In the end, they were afforded only a brief moment of movement. Both the mayor, who had stood up on wavering legs to flee, and his wife, who had tried to attack Ferdinand, froze in place after a few steps. Then they dropped down onto the stage. When they attempted to stand back up while they could move their arms, their legs were completely paralyzed. My legs! The woman screamed. Soon the others started crying out as well, voices of pain, fear, and desperation. I narrowed my eyes as I watched them closer, and that was when I noticed their feet had turned light gray. At first, I assumed they were all simply wearing matching shoes, but then the color spread to their clothes. They were gradually being dyed gray, and the further it advanced, the less they could move. It looks like their legs are being turned to stone. That just spread across their entire bodies, Justice replied, now leaning forward even more eagerly without even trying to hide his enthusiasm. I really couldn't share his enjoyment. Had Ferdinand not been shooting me the occasional harsh glare, I would have already closed my eyes and covered my ears so that I wouldn't have to see their writhing bodies or hear their piercing screams. The black mist eroded the metals like acid, the white stones breaking apart from all sides. By the time they had been reduced to half their original size, the prisoners were gray up to their waist. Their torsos hardened before my eyes, and as the color reached their necks, they lost even the ability to scream. When the metals had broken apart entirely, the prisoners were gray from head to toe, frozen like statues. Ferdinand then whipped his staff, making the magic circle disappear. In an instant, all 6 statues broke apart. Large cracks had run through them, spreading until each person collapsed onto the stage with a heavy thud. The impact was enough to shatter them completely, sending large chunks of what looked like stone all over the place. Oh, so essentially the execution spell is turning them to stone, essentially. Okay. And it's right. I'd rather see that than see them, like their throats slit or something. These fragments then began to crumble like sand until eventually their ash-like remains were carried away on the still cold spring wind. They had no metals to attach to their gravestones and no bodies to bury. Traitors were allowed no burial, nor were they permitted to be mourned. This is awful. I couldn't stop thinking about their faces twisted in fear and despair, their mouths agape in dying screams that still rung in my ears. The looks of agonized suffering that remained in their eyes until their very last moments were burned into my mind, having been frozen on their statue-like faces before they were turned to ash and blown away on the wind. No human being should have to die like that. Spectacular. Wasn't that wonderful, milady? No! Justice asked excitedly, but I didn't even have the motivation to put on a fake smile and nod. How could he have been so excited to watch people be killed in such a horrific, disrespectful manner? That was beyond words. My toes felt unnaturally cold. The contents of my stomach stirred as I was overwhelmed with disgust. I would have actually preferred to pass out completely than experience the emotion that was surging through me. But I wasn't low on stamina or mana. All I could do was stand at the edge of the stage and continue to watch, not even allowed to close my eyes. The place was silent, and everyone present wore expressions that made their terror toward the nobility clear. They had just witnessed the immense power that nobles wielded, and that been thoroughly taught that their lives could be taken away at any moment. With the spectacle over, Rick, who had been kneeling on the opposite side of the stage, stood up to address the crowd in a clear voice. Everyone, the traitors are now gone. They stood against our Archduke and put our entire city at risk. Our good names were sullied due to their actions. To restore our honor, we must work to repay the damage they caused until our newly baptized children come of age. And yet more years after that, we must act together so that the mercy of the Saint of Ehrenfest, who saved us from execution as traitors, will not go unrewarded. The journey ahead will no doubt be tough, but it is a journey that must be made. Rick looked just as fearful as the crowd he was speaking to, but even so, he was doing his absolute best to try and get Haas back on its feet. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a new decade during which Haas would repay the Archducal family, and seeing their determination moved me. It's not over yet. Not for Haas, and not for me as a Saint of Ehrenfest. I took deep, deep breaths to collect myself, the screams that were still echoing in my ears, but I couldn't let them distract me forever. Handling the situation in Haas after the mayor's execution was part of the task that I had been given. I needed to work together with Rick as much as possible to help the city recover. And so I deliberately walked to the center of the stage, acting as calm and graceful as I could. I stood beside Ferdinand, all the while fighting down the bile that had risen up in my throat as I moved. All eyes were on me, from both the crowd gathered in the plaza and the people remaining on the stage. The moment I closed my eyes, memories of the guilty writhing in pain and terror flashed in my mind. I shook my head to force them away, took a powerful step forward, and raised my head. Here you are, Ferdinand said, handing me the voice-amplifying magic tool. I gripped it tightly, moved it to my mouth, and then sucked in air. People of Haas, I began to address the crowd. My voice was quivering slightly. I swallowed, trying to steady myself, then took another breath. People of Haas, I repeated, this time sounding a bit better. Please endure for just 1 year. Relieved that I had managed to push down my unease, I continued. Nobles used the enormous power of mana to strike pure terror into the hearts of commoners, but it was also used to save their lives. I had been given the role of a saint, so I needed to play my part and give hope to Haas and citizens. Whether spring prayer is held in Haas next year will all depend on how the Archduke perceives your efforts in the meantime. I shall do what I can, but the deciding factor will be your own actions. The aghast expressions of the farmers lit up slightly when they heard that. By working hard, they might still get spring prayer next year. Some started whispering that they could surely manage as long as it was just 1 year, and the returning hope in their faces lightened the burden on my shoulders a little. It has been proven that none among you harbor traitorous intentions. Now please, prove through actions that you wish to atone for your crimes. I would like to visit Haas during spring prayer next year to offer prayers and blessings to you all. At that, cheers erupted from the crowd. Amid the noise, Ferdinand instructed me to bring forth my high beast, and together we headed to the monastery. Joining me in my panda bus was Fran, Zom, Bridget, and Justice with his big box. That was absolutely wonderful, Lady Rosemine. Thank you, Bridget. I managed to smile back, but my head was spinning. My chest ached, and my stomach churned like my body was trying to throw up all the bad feelings inside of me. I wanted to escape reality, either immersing myself in books or going to sleep to provide a brief respite from my thoughts. When we landed in front of the door to the monastery, we were greeted by Grey Priests, the Gilberta Company, and everyone's attendants, all of whom were kneeling in wait. Justice, Eckert, Daniel, Bridget, prepare your rooms within the chapel, Ferdinand said, handing each of them a red face stone. They got to work at once with their attendants, with Justice ordering his to carry the big box set of my high beast. Now that everyone was out of my panda bust, I put it away. Drained both physically and mentally, I hung my head only for a bitter rush of vomit to catch in my throat once again. I couldn't throw up here and now, with everyone watching, so I desperately swallowed it down and wiped my teary eyes with my sleeve. Rosemine, you seem unwell. You need rest. Attendants, prepare her room, Ferdinand instructed. My attendants hurriedly stood up and went inside. I had given Gil a magic tool to open my hidden room since he had gone to the monastery first. While the room would be ready to some degree, there was still some things that I had to be organized before I could rest. I saw my attendants off in a complete daze and aimlessly looked around. That was when I saw Dad among the people who had come out to greet us. He looked incredibly worried, and it was immediately obvious that he was racking his brain for anything that he could do to comfort me. A single thought ran through my mind. I wanted to run over, call him Dad, and sob into his chest. Oh, you can't do that, though! Rosemine, Ferdinand placed a hand on my shoulder, and I immediately came back to my senses. I would never be permitted to do anything like that. I lowered the arms that I had started to raise, putting my foot back down before I could start moving toward him. Ferdinand gestured me forward, but no sooner had I started walking than Dad offered me his thick cloak. Lady Rosemine, I offer you this cloak if you would accept it. You look very cold. I looked at the cloak and then up at Ferdinand, who shot Dad a firm look, but Dad simply returned the glare, continuing to hold out the cloak. Ferdinand looked down with narrowed eyes for a moment, then furrowed his brow. Are you cold, Rosemine? Yes, I'm cold. I'm very, very cold. I thank you ever so much, Gunter. I took the cloak from Dad and hugged it close. It was a little dusty, but not enough to mask his smell, which made me feel bad for relief and bitter sadness. I buried my face in the cloak on the spot. Hi, Bishop. Have this if you're still cold. No, this one's a lot warmer. Unexpected voices called out to me, and for a second the tears stopped. I looked up and saw 5 soldiers all holding out their cloaks to me. Oh, that's sweet. They don't know the situation, but they still want to help. Oh, that's sweet. I couldn't help but smile a little as I saw the row of men forming a cloak wall in front of me, and the heaviness in my heart seemed to lighten ever so slightly. I'm afraid that I will be unable to carry any more, but I appreciate the concern. May you all be blessed for your kindness. With the cloak in hand, I went to my hidden room where I found my attendants busily moving around to prepare things for me to sleep. I moved to a corner and started spreading out Dad's cloak, helping to wrap myself up in it, and stay out of everyone's way. Rosemine, let me see that for a second. No, I replied, hugging the cloak tightly to protect it from Ferdinand's outstretched hand. He rubbed his temples, then quickly snatched one end. You cannot bring it to bed as it is. It will merely be cleansing it. Give it to me. Cleansing? I said, tilting my head. Ferdinand used that opening to steal the cloak. He took out his staff and began chanting something right then and there, causing a ball of water to appear from seemingly nowhere. It engulfed the cloak before quickly disappearing again. What was that spell? As I said, a cleansing spell. I guess to make sure it wasn't dirty. But that would probably get rid of the smell. It was apparently an essential spell for knights when they spent multiple days on Phoebe's hunting trips, as it could be used for cleansing both one's body and tools. I didn't know that magic could be so convenient. I never heard of that spell before. It would be unnecessary for you to learn, since you have attendants and servants, Ferdinand explained. It was considered a waste for nobles to use mana to clean themselves when they could simply have somebody else do it. But in circumstances such as these, where one had to stay outside without any attendants accompanying them, there was no other choice. This is a special exception. It would be a disaster for you to bring that to bed, but there is no time to clean it now, he continued, plopping the cloak onto my head. It was clean now, and the dusty smell was gone. Rest well. I shall explain the circumstances to the Gilberta Company. At that he exited the room as if to say that his business here was done. As I passed the time smelling the cloak, I heard Gil tell Fran that he had brought in enough hot water. Monica then promptly chased them both out of the room. Lady Rosemine, your bath is ready. Would the men be so kind as to leave? That day I slept with my head buried in Dad's cloak. The nasty, distressing feelings faded, and I didn't have a single bad dream. Well, that's a surprise! That is a big fat surprise right there, to be honest. But, yeah, that sucks. I imagine she's going to have some bad dreams in probably the days, months to come, probably. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.